It had always been just a family tradition, one of those quirky things that seemed to set the Whittaker family apart. For generations they had passed down an old leather-bound journal filled with strange symbols, letters and numbers. It was known as the family code, and as a child Ethan had always thought it was a fun game, a puzzle that he and his cousins would try to crack during family gatherings. The code was supposed to be an unsolvable riddle, a piece of family folklore that led nowhere. At least that's what everyone had always said. But all that changed the day Ethan finally cracked it. He had found himself home for the holidays, back in his parents' house for the first time in years. His career had taken him far from home into the world of corporate law, where he had built a name for himself. But despite all his success, there was something about being back in that old house, with its creaking floorboards and musty smell, that stirred memories of simpler times. That was when he found the journal again. It had been tucked away in a forgotten drawer in his father's study, the worn leather cover still familiar under his fingertips. He hadn't looked at it in years, but something drew him to it that night. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was the need for a distraction from the weight of his responsibilities. Or maybe, deep down, Ethan had always known there was more to the family code than anyone had let on. He spent hours that night poring over the pages, tracing the strange symbols and numbers that had baffled generations of Whittakers before him. But this time something clicked. The patterns started to make sense. Piece by piece, the code began to reveal itself as if it had been waiting all these years for the right person to solve it. What Ethan found wasn't just a puzzle. It was a confession. The code, as it turned out, was a cipher that revealed a dark family secret. A secret that had been buried for generations, hidden within the symbols and letters that had been passed down as a game. The truth that emerged from the decoded message shook Ethan to his core. His family, the Whittakers, had not always been the respected, upstanding figures they were now. Generations ago they had been involved in something far darker. Something criminal. The code revealed that Ethan's great-great-grandfather, Samuel Whittaker, had been part of a secretive smuggling operation, trafficking stolen goods and artifacts across the Atlantic. Worse still, the family had made a fortune from it, using their ill-gotten gains to build the wealth and status they enjoyed today. The journal detailed how Samuel and his associates had carefully laundered their profits through legitimate business ventures, slowly transforming their criminal enterprise into a respectable family name. But the code also revealed something else, something even more shocking. Samuel had betrayed his closest ally, a man named Edgar Holloway, who had helped him orchestrate the entire operation. In a bid to protect the family's wealth and ensure its survival, Samuel had framed Edgar for their crimes, sending him to prison while the Whittakers went free. Edgar's descendants had spent generations in poverty and disgrace, while the Whittakers had risen to prominence, their dark past hidden behind layers of respectability. As Ethan stared at the decoded message, the weight of what he had uncovered settled heavily on his shoulders. The family fortune, the prestige, the reputation, all of it had been built on betrayal and lies. And now he was the only one who knew the truth. His first instinct was to destroy the journal, to burn it and pretend he had never discovered the code. After all, what good could come from exposing a century-old crime? His family had worked so hard to build a name for themselves. How could he tear it all down now? But the guilt gnawed at him. How could he live with this secret, knowing that his family's success had come at the cost of another's ruin? The Holloway family had suffered because of his ancestors' greed, and Ethan had always prided himself on being a man of integrity. Could he really turn his back on that now? For days Ethan wrestled with the decision. He could go to the authorities, but what would that accomplish? The crime was too old, the evidence too faded. And yet he couldn't simply pretend the secret didn't exist. In the end, Ethan knew he had to act. But instead of going to the authorities, he did something unexpected. He sought out the Holloway family. Through old records and a bit of research, Ethan tracked down the last remaining descendant of Edgar Holloway, a woman named Clara, who lived in a modest home on the outskirts of town. She had no idea who he was when he knocked on her door, her face lined with years of hard living. "Can I help you?" Clara asked, her eyes wary as she stood in the doorway. Ethan swallowed, the weight of the journal heavy in his hands. I have something to tell you. Something about your family. My name is Ethan Whittaker." At the mention of his name, Clara's eyes narrowed. The Whittakers were well known in the town, wealthy, powerful, untouchable. But Clara had never had anything to do with them. Till now. Ethan explained everything, About the journal, the code, the betrayal that had sent her ancestor to prison. Clara listened in stunned silence, her face a mixture of disbelief and anger as the truth unfolded. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked, her voice tight with emotion. Ethan looked down, his heart heavy. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. My family owes you everything. We took everything from you and I can't undo what happened, but I want to make it right as best I can." Clara stared at him, her hands trembling slightly. "And how do you plan to do that?" Ethan had spent days thinking about that very question. He couldn't change the past, but he could offer restitution. He could offer Clara and her family a portion of the Whittaker wealth, money that had been built on the foundation of that betrayal. "I want to help you," Ethan said quietly. "Financially. My family's fortune wouldn't exist without what happened to yours. It's only right that you should get a part of it." Clara's eyes softened slightly, but she shook her head. "You think money is going to fix what your family did?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I don't. But it's a start." The silence between them was heavy, the weight of generations of betrayal and lies hanging in the air. Finally, Clara sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. "I don't know what to do with this," she said quietly. "But I appreciate you telling me. It took guts to come here." Ethan nodded, feeling the burden on his chest begin to lift, even if just a little. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "But I'll do whatever I can to make things right." Clara stared at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "We'll see." As Ethan left her house that day, the journal still tucked under his arm, he knew that the road to redemption would be long. His family's dark secret had been exposed, and it was now his responsibility to protect both the truth and the Whittaker name. But he also knew that he couldn't hide behind lies any longer. The family code had been cracked, and with it, the burden of history had shifted onto his shoulders. But for the first time in generations, Ethan was ready to carry it. For better or worse, the truth was out. And now it was up to him to decide what to do with it.